Look at that, Tarkov has just released a brand new update. The game has wiped and everyone is complaining. They've just done a Unity upgrade and people are complaining this is the most unstable, unoptimized and buggy patch they have ever released. From what I've seen, kind of agree. Now, I've been taking a backseat from Tarkov for quite a while, but after seeing all the complaints of optimization and stuff like that, I thought I would jump on and see what I can do. Work my magic as I always do to try and get this game running a little bit smoother. Now, for the most part, from what I can see and from what I've seen other people experiencing, this is server-side stuttering and all that sort of stuff. So for the most part, we can't fix that. But what we can fix is the terrible below sub 30 FPS that people are getting on the new customs rework and get that a little higher. I'm thinking we can almost double that on most systems with these settings. As you can see from our non-optimized settings here, just walking through customs in the snow, which by the way doesn't affect FPS like you'd think it would. The snow actually improves it because the game isn't rendering grass detail as much. So where you should be getting higher FPS, we're getting 30, 40 and then low 50s in occasion where you're looking towards the outskirts of the map, but for the most part 30 and 40 FPS. On my system, which I was using, has a 3090 and a Ryzen 9 5950X in it. That's a good system. Not warranting 30 FPS, so let's see what we can do to change it. Before we get into it, let's get the basics out of the way. I recommend that you update your graphics card's drivers and your Windows security patches are up to date as well. That's just bog standard troubleshooting on anything. Your game will run smoother when your graphics card is up to date, and believe it or not, it will run smoother when you are focusing on, your security patches and making sure your Windows is all up to date as well. There are some things that I recommend doing before we get into the game though, and that is going into your settings. Once you're in your settings, if you go and find a setting and type in game mode, you'll see game mode settings here. Make sure game mode setting is turned on, and then if you go into graphics, which is a recommended setting, you can then find escape from Tarkov.exe and change your GPU preference to high performance. Next up, go into your NVIDIA control panel just by clicking on the up arrow down the bottom on your taskbar and then right clicking on the NVIDIA icon and going NVIDIA control panel. Once this opens, make sure your monitor's refresh rate is the highest it can go inside of display and change resolution. And then you're going to want to go up the top to click manage 3D settings. And then you've got global settings, but you don't want to change the global settings on your whole system. You want to change it just for escape from Tarkov. So if you go over to the program settings tab, you will have escape from Tarkov.exe in this drop down. If you don't have it, just click add. And then you could find escape from Tarkov in the list here. But if not, just click browse and go to the install location. Once you've got the escape from Tarkov.exe in here, you can change a bunch of the settings. Now I won't go over what each setting does because as you can see as you hover over them, each of them have their own description. Basically anything in bold is what I have changed. So anisotropic filtering is application controlled, anti-aliasing FXAA is off, anti-aliasing gamma correction is on, anti-aliasing mode is application controlled, anti-aliasing transparency is off, background application max frame rate is off, low latency mode is ultra, monitor technology is G-Sync, multi-frame sampled AA or MFAA is off, our OpenGL rendering GPU is NVIDIA, your GPU basically, so for me it's a 3090, but make sure it's your GPU and not the CPU's built-in GPU for some CPUs. Power management mode is preferred maximum performance. Preferred refresh rate is highest available. Texture filtering and anisotropic sampling optimization limits is on. Texture filtering negative LOD bias is allow. Texture filtering quality is high performance. Texture filtering trilinear optimization is on. Threaded optimization is on. triple buffering is off, and vertical sync is off. That's all that's changed in the NVIDIA control panel. You can then go to your application, your BSG Launcher here, and before you go into the game, you can then click on your drop down next to your name and then go to Launcher Settings. I recommend doing the following. When I close the launcher window, make sure the drop down is exit the launcher and it's not still running in the background, because that takes up PC resources. And then when I launch the game, exit the launcher completely. After that, scroll all the way down and clean your temp folder. Just do that every now and then and it will clear any background processes on your game. Once you've done that, you can then finally go into your game and change some in-game settings. So as for our settings here, it's pretty straightforward and similar to previous wipes, but they have added some new things. I have my quick slots, stamina stance, health condition, and everything like that set to auto hide. My health color scheme is polychrome, so I can see at a glance a lot easier just how messed up my body parts are based on the color rather than the shade. And then I have priority window set to auto, and then here down at the bottom, the main thing, the head bobbing and FOV. FOV, I'm sticking around 65 to 70. That's as high as I will go to avoid the big eye relief strain that you get at higher FOVs, but also still being able to see my peripheral. I then have the head bobbing turned all the way down because it makes you feel motion sick and doesn't look very good at all. So let's educate you on a few things that FOV does, shall we? We are in the Snowy Customs looking through the forest, and when we aim down a scope, you can see we've got some eye relief here, and that is just the fading towards the edges of our optic. Very simple. What happens is if we turn down our FOV, so I'm on 75 at the minute, if we turn it all the way down to 50, you will see there's a lot less eye relief on the scope, and if we turn it all the way up to 75, more eye relief on the scope. Here's a side-by-side comparison for you. As you can see, it's a noticeable difference, and this is early morning. Once you've got harsh light on your weapon, you will notice that even more. Another thing that you should look at is the trees in the distance. When we are aiming down our scope, or even not, you will see that there are trees quite spaced out. The higher FOV you have, the more peripheral vision you have, but everything looks further away. And then if we were to turn that all the way down, everything is much closer together, everything feels closer, and you can spot things a lot easier. The only problem with that is you cannot see as far into your peripheral. So for me, I prefer a higher FOV, but I know a lot of you will opt for something more in the mid-60s range to get the best of both worlds. Everything else is pretty much personal preference. Even the stuff up here is personal preference if you wanted to, but this is just my settings for the game tab. In graphics settings, this is where we get a little bit more on it. So for screen resolution, use your native resolution and your aspect ratio. A lot of people like to turn down their aspect ratio to make it 4:3 or 16:10 when they're using a 16:9 monitor. That's great for seeing stuff, but it doesn't work well for the long-term looks of the game, and we are going for a combination of both, right? We've also got our screen mode as full screen because we want our games to run as smooth as possible. Anything other than full screen on any gaming application, not just Tarkov, will cause a slight increase to input latency, and with a game like this you want minimal of that as possible so you can get those shots on target quicker. Our overall graphics quality is turned down all the way to low to allow us to change the least amount of settings, but as soon as you start changing stuff it will change to custom anyway. Our texture quality is set to high. If this doesn't work on a lower end system for you, then turn this down to medium. I wouldn't go any lower than medium if I were you. Our shadow quality is low. This doesn't only reduce the look of the shadows, they make them a little bit more jagged, but what it does do to benefit you in game is lighten your shadows, meaning you can see players in darker areas a lot easier and those hiding under tree cover a lot better. So always have your shadow quality on low. Does make them look a little bit more jagged and not as nice, but it helps when you're fighting against players. Our object level of detail quality is 2.5. If you have a high-end system, you can go up to 3. I have it on 2.5 on my system and it works perfectly fine. This is basically just your detail in the distance. It also helps with PMCs rendering in further ranges, but with the sizes of the maps, it doesn't really make a difference. If you go down to 2, there's some slight pop in. 2.5 is absolutely fine. Overall visibility is 1500 meters. Anything higher, you're just tanking FPS. 1500 is a nice sweet spot. Again, our maps are not massive enough to warrant it. Our cloud quality is low. Anything higher, clouds look nice, but it just eats through your FPS, so we don't worry about that. Anti-aliasing is TAA. DLSS I have off, and so do I have off AMD FSR 2.2 and 3.0. If you are struggling with FPS, then you can turn this on to performance or quality. Both of those, depending on your system, will improve your performance. Quality will make the game look a little nicer. Performance, the game will look a little bit more grainy, but it will improve performance more than it would on quality. The only problem with DLSS is you will notice some slight frame smoothing. Doesn't make a massive difference to your gameplay, but if you're quite hyper focused on that, then it can make you not as accurate if you're moving faster with your mouse. Resampling I have as 1x off. If you have a really terrible system, you can downsample your game, meaning you are playing at a lower resolution, but it uses resampling to look like 1440p, if you will. But I have this as off because it can cause some more stutters. We don't want that. HBAO is set to high performance and SSR is set to medium. Now I recommend having this on, and I will show you why in game now. Not only is SSR or screen space reflections good for reflections like puddles and stuff in the world, it's also good for dark corridors and darker areas around the map. As you can see at the moment I have it off, and especially around the edges and closer to the walls, it is darker because there are no reflections bouncing off of obstacles here. If I was to turn that on, even to the lowest setting, you will notice a difference. Things look a lot brighter, especially on the walls, and you will notice that the whole interior has been brightened up. If your PC can handle it, then I definitely recommend going to FSR on Ultra, because that makes an extremely noticeable difference. But for the most people, I recommend having this on at least low, maybe medium if possible. Anisotropic filtering is also set to on, and NVIDIA Reflex Low Latency is set to on and boost. Again, we want as minimal input latency as possible, and this will help with that. My sharpness is set to 0.5. By default, if you want to go back to 0.7, 0.8, that's fine. Anything extra sharp and it will cause your game to stutter and the FPS to drop. Basically how sharpness works is it isn't true sharpness in this game. What it does is layer the same texture on top of itself until the image looks sharper. So if you're looking at a texture of some leaves and foliage, then you can have that texture over and over and over again on top of each other. That's just going to be more things for your computer to render, and therefore more tanking of your FPS. If you're also seeing streamers and stuff like that where their face cam is all like mushed and 1 pixel, and when they're moving around wooded areas in Tarkov, it looks a bit messy like that. Sharpness has a big part to play in this, so if you're looking at that or you're a streamer yourself and you're having this issue, try turning your sharpness down in game and sharpen up in the video control panel, for example. Lobby FPS limit and game FPS limit is always set to maximum, and other than that, all the tick boxes are off apart from high quality color and Streets of Tarkov lower texture resolution mode. My post effects is the same as always. As you can see here, my brightness is 35, but as it's snowing at the minute with the season in the game, I will drop it down to 0 because the snow is quite bright as it is. Saturation up a little bit, clarity all the way up to allow seeing objects further in the distance with more clarity. Obviously, it reduces some fog as well. The color grading is Cognac, and this is something that I've been using for ages. It adds basically a blue hue to the shadows, allows you to see easier in darker areas. And I'll show you what these settings look like for post effects in game now. Just bear in mind that post effects, having it enabled, does drop about 5 FPS off. So if you're really struggling for FPS, then turn post effects off and adjust your NVIDIA control panel color settings and adjust your monitor settings. You should be doing this anyway, but if you can't be bothered with the faff of your monitor's color profile and all that configuration, then you don't mind losing that 5 FPS, then these are good post effects settings for you. My post effects also really help bring out colors in the game and define players against their backdrop. This is my post effects on and this is it off. As you can see, there is a hell of a lot more color in the image with my post effects on without it looking too oversaturated. The color grading does a lot of this. As you can see, I have Cognac on around 40% to give them blue tones. As you can see, if I crank it all the way up, there are some blue in the shadows there. Post effects work well, especially in darker areas. As you can see with my post effects applied, you can see quite well in this dark warehouse here, but if I turn them off, it's a lot grayer. Everything blends into one. It's not as easy to see, but if I turn it on, you can see a lot better. And that's pretty much it. In the exact same locations of the map, as you can see, we are getting a much smoother, higher FPS experience, and the game just looks better. Even with the settings cranked out previously to now, the game looks better than it did on Ultra, just because there's no grain, there's no noise, and everything that is applied by default that Tarkov has. I hope this video helps, as it usually does for all of you. Thank you all for your support on this channel with my break from Tarkov. I will make occasional Tarkov videos, but this isn't my main priority anymore. Hope you can understand that, but I will be here to help you where needed. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.